The second thing to think about is everyone in the Valley gets wrong that we optimize when we think about growth for ourselves. So my favorite example is notifications. Again, talk to lots of companies, advise lots of companies. Every single company, when they talk about notifications, goes, oh, I'm getting too many notifications. I think that's what we need to optimize for on notifications. Okay, are your power users leaving your site because they're getting too many notifications? No. Then why would you optimize that? They're probably grown-ups and they can use filters. What you need to focus on is the marginal user. The one person who doesn't get a notification in a given day or month or year. Our experience of our products, and by the way, like building an awesome product is all about thinking about the power user, right? Building an incredible product is definitely optimizing for the people who use your product the most. But driving growth, people who are already using your product all the time are not the ones you have to worry about. So in this Danny Ferrante video, there's also, that's linked from the lecture page, there's also talk about our growth accounting framework that we use to think about for growth. And we looked at new users, resurrected users, people who weren't on Facebook for 30 days and came back, and churned users. And the resurrected and churn numbers for pretty much every product I've ever seen dominate the new user count once you reach a sensible point of growth, a couple of years in, whatever. And all those users who were churning and resurrecting had low friend counts and didn't find their friends and so weren't connected to the great stuff that was going on Facebook. And so the number one thing we needed to focus on was getting them to those 10 friends, getting them to whatever number of friends they needed. So think about the user on the margin. Don't think about yourself when you're thinking about growth. So operating for growth, what you really need to think about is what is the North Star of your company? What is the one metric where if everyone in the company is thinking about it and driving their product towards that metric and their actions towards moving that metric up, you know in the long run your company will be successful. And by the way, they're probably all correlated to each other, so it's fine to pick almost any metric. Whichever one is like the deepest, like that you feel the best about, that aligns with like your mission and your values, probably go for that one. But realistically, daily active users fairly correlated to monthly active users. We could have gone with either one. Amount of content shared, also very correlated to how many users there are, because guess what? You add a user, they share content. So lots of things end up being correlated. Pick the one that fits with you and that you know you're going to be able to stick with for a long time, but have a North Star. Have a North Star and know the magic moment that when a user experiences that, they will deliver on that metric for you on the North Star. And then think about the marginal user, don't think about yourself. Those are, I think, the really important points when you're operating for growth. Everything has to come from the top. So the last area here is tactics. And my hope was that I could hit a few of these, and then I've got a list of tactics I want to go through that I'm better talking with a whiteboard and whatever on. But you can ask me questions as I'm going through on those about how they work and what goes better. But the important tactics that you need to think about are, this is a great guy, by the way, Tom Fishburne. He lives in the Bay Area, and he does these really cynical cartoons that I love. So let's say you found your niche market that you're going to have a monopoly on inside the mousetrap market. It's a silenced mousetrap for sitting under bed so that if the mice come to your bed overnight, like they can be killed without waking you up. So that's your niche market. And your mousetrap is better than anybody else for that market. What typically happens in Silicon Valley is everyone thinks marketers are useless. Like I thought marketers were useless when I was a physics student, so I'm sure as engineering students you must think we're awful, awful people who aren't useful to have around. Like, build it and they will come. That is something that is very much the mantra in the Valley, and I don't believe it's true. I believe you actually have to work. There's a good article, again, in the lecture page from interviewing Ben Silverman, where he talks about how the growth of Pinterest was driven by marketing. And it's a really good article to read into. I'm biased, of course. So the first tactic I want to talk about is internationalization. Facebook internationalized too late. Cheryl said it broadly in public, and I definitely agree with that. One of the biggest barriers to our long-term growth, and one of the biggest things we had to deal with, was all the countries where there were clones. Famously, StudiVZ had fakebook.css in their HTML. And there were a ton of sites like that out there, whether it was StudiVZ as a clear clone, Contactia, Mixi, SciWorld, Orkut. There were all these different social networks around the world that grew up while Facebook was focused on the US. And so internationalizing was an important barrier we needed to knock down, and knocking down barriers is often very important to think about for growth. Facebook started off as college only. So every college that it was launched in was knocking down a barrier. When Facebook expanded beyond colleges to high schools, I wasn't at the company, but that was a company-shaking moment where people questioned whether or not Facebook could actually survive, the culture of the site could survive. Then expanding from high schools to everyone, that was like just before I joined, and that was a shocking moment, and that spurred the growth onto 50 million, and then we hit a brick wall. And when we hit that brick wall, that was the point when a lot of existential questions were being asked inside Facebook about whether any social network could ever get to more than 100 million users, which sounds stupid now, but at the time, no one had ever achieved it. Everyone had kind of tapped out between 50 and 100 million users, and we were worried that it wasn't possible. And that was the point at which the growth team got set up. Chamath brought a bunch of us together. It was he said very publicly that he wanted to fire me on multiple occasions, and he probably should have done. But without Chamath, I think none of us would have stayed at the company. We were a really weird bunch of people, but it worked out. And the two things we did, I think, that really, really drove growth initially was, number one, we focused on that 10 friends in 14 days and getting users to the magic moment. And that was something Zuck drove, because we were all stuck in analysis paralysis saying, is it causation? Is it correlation? Zuck was like, you really think if no one gets a friend that they'll be active on Facebook? Are you crazy? The second thing was internationalization. It was knocking down another barrier. And when we launched it, I think there were two things that we did really well. Number one was, even though we were late and we were stressed about being late, we took the time to build it in a scalable way. We moved slow to move fast. And you can actually hear the full story from Naomi in one of the videos linked from the lecture page. But what we did was we wrapped all the strings in the site in FBT, which is our translation script, and then, or translation extraction script, and then we created the community translation platform so that we didn't just have professional translators translating the site, we could have all of our users translating the site. And we got French translated in 12 hours. But we managed to get, to this day, we're now at 104 languages translated by Facebook. For Facebook, 70 of those are translated by the community. And we took the time to build something that would enable us to scale. The other thing is we prioritized the right languages. So back then, the right languages, the big four languages, were French, Italian, German, and Spanish. Figs. And Chinese, but we were blocked in China. So we focused on French, Italian, German, and Spanish. Now look at that list. That's today's distribution of languages. Italian isn't on the list anymore. French and German are about to fall off. In the last year, we quadrupled the number of people on Facebook in Hindi. Quadrupled. And so building for where the world is today is an easy mistake to make, and it's what a lot of the other social networks did. We built a scalable translation infrastructure that actually enabled us to attack all of the languages so we could be ready for where the future is going to be. And you'll probably be able to see some stuff from our Internet.org summit in India about where we want to go with language translations later today, because I think they're talking about that stuff there. So these are the tactics I want to go through now, and I'll stick with the whiteboard for that stuff. But I'd really encourage you guys, as I go through these, if you've got any questions about them, let me know. I think this should be like a more free-form time anyway, but I think some of these tactics are quite interesting. So virality. Yes. I think there are two ways to look at virality. There's a great book. The book on the right here by Adam Pennenberg, Viral Loop, goes through a bunch of case studies of companies that have grown through viral marketing. And I strongly encourage you, if you're interested in viral marketing, to get that book. I think Ogilvy and advertising is great as well, because chapter 7, he's like, if you can't think of anything else, stick a car to a billboard with super glue and people will buy your super glue. And he's got some really good creative tips in there. Like the guy's been dead 20 years, and I think he's still, I buy, everyone on my team gets both of these books when they start on my team. So virality. So Sean Parker has this model that he taught, or he told us about when I joined Facebook, which is to think about virality for a product in terms of three things. First is payload. So how many people can you hit with any given viral blast? Second, he had cooler words for these. I'm not quite as cool. Second is conversion rate, and third is frequency. Payload, frequency, and conversion rate, whatever, that order. So how many people can you hit at once is payload. How many times can you hit them per blast is frequency, and what are they going to convert at? And that gives you a fundamental idea of how viral a product is. So Hotmail is the canonical example of brilliant viral marketing, right? Back when Hotmail launched, there were a bunch of mail companies that had been funded and that were throwing huge amounts of money at traditional advertising. How many people know the Hotmail story about virality? Awesome, great, new audience. Sorry. There's 2 or 3 people who'll be bored. But Hotmail, back at that time, people couldn't get free email clients. They had to be tied to their ISP. And Hotmail and a few other companies launched, and their clients were available wherever you went. You could log in via library internet or whatever, school internet, and be able to get access to that, which was a really big value proposition for everyone who wanted to access it. Most of the companies went out there and did big TV campaigns and billboard campaigns and newspaper campaigns and things like that, bought a lot of advertising off Yahoo, all of those things. But the Hotmail team didn't have as much funding, and so they had to scrabble around to figure out how to do it. So what they did was add that little link at the bottom of every email that said, sent from Hotmail, get your free email here. Now the interesting thing is, that meant the payload was low, right? You email one person at a time, not necessarily going to have a huge payload. Maybe you send around some of those viral spam emails, but then I'm not sure I'll click on your link. The frequency is high though, because you're emailing the same people over and over and over, which means you're going to hit them once, twice, 3 times a day with that same link and really move up the impressions. And the conversion rate was also very high because people didn't like being tied to their ISP email. And so Hotmail ended up being extremely viral because it had high frequency and high conversion rate. Another example is PayPal. PayPal is interesting because PayPal has 2 sides to it. PayPal has the buyer and the seller side. The other thing that's interesting about PayPal is its mechanism for viral growth was eBay. And so you can use all kinds of things for virality that may not look necessarily obviously viral. So PayPal, if you sent money, if you said to a seller, I am going to send you money, I can't think of a higher conversion rate. Frequency was low, payload was low. But PayPal did this thing where they gave away money when you got your friends to sign up for PayPal, and so that's how they went viral on the consumer side. They didn't have to do that for sellers, because if I said, I am going to send you money via this, you will take that. And even on the consumer side, they went viral because someone said, sign up for this thing and you'll get 10 bucks. Why wouldn't you? So they were able to go viral, but in both cases, it was because their conversion rate was incredibly high on the buyer and the seller side, not because their payload and frequency was high. Make sense? So this is a really good way to look at virality if you want to say, is this product viral? Facebook was not viral via email sharing or anything like that. Facebook was purely viral via word of mouth. Because the interesting thing about PayPal and Hotmail is to use them, the first person had to send an email to someone who wasn't on the service. With Facebook, there's no native way to contact people who aren't on the service. And everyone thinks of Facebook as like viral marketing success, and that's actually not how it grew. It was word of mouth virality because it was an awesome product you wanted to tell your friends about. How's everyone doing? Is this interesting? Great question, yes.
So when you're talking about this low payload in both those examples, in the later rounds, as this sort of campaign or whatever you want to call it gets going, are you going to have a much higher payload as more and more people are sending Hotmail to more and more folks, and that way your payload grows and grows and grows?
So the question is, in the first round, it makes sense that it has a low payload, but in later rounds, aren't you going to have higher payloads as people send more and more and more emails? I guess in my head, well, first and foremost, I think you actually only send emails to a small number of people. So compared to like the massive viral engines that exist today, where you import someone's entire contact book and send them all an email, or where you post to everyone's friends on Facebook, the actual payloads are still very small, even if it's everyone that you email on a frequent basis you hit. And I'm also thinking really per email sent out, how many people are on it, but it's a fair point. Like, yeah, as more people get on Hotmail, they'll send more emails. As more people use email, the product actually grows more and more successfully. So that's a fair point. Go for it.
Doesn't like point of conversion also matter? So like on Hotmail, you just click and you sign up, but if you see a billboard ad, there's more resistance to signing up.
Completely agree. That's why. Oh, sorry. Doesn't point of conversion matter as well? So on Hotmail, you click to sign up, but on a billboard, you have to remember the URL, go to the website, type it in, find the registration button, click register, and sign up. Yes, anything you can do to move friction out of the flow And going from an offline ad to an online ad removes huge amounts of friction from the flow, obviously. Totally agree with that. One more at the back.
Frequency and conversion related?
Aren't frequency and conversion rate related? Absolutely. If you hit someone with the same promotion, I repeated that, aren't frequency and conversion rate related. If you hit someone with the same email over and over and over again, or the same banner ad, this is one of the things that's fundamental about online marketing. The same rules apply to every channel. If you hit someone with the same Facebook ad over and over and over, the more times you hit them with the same ad, the less they'll click. That's why we have like creative exhaustion. You have to rotate creatives on Facebook. Same with banner ads. Same with newsfeed stories. The 50th time you see that IQ story in your newsfeed, you are not going to click on it. If you haven't clicked on the 49 before, you're not going to click on the 50th. The same is absolutely true with these emails. So if you send the same email over and over and over to people for an invite, then, or if you send the same little link at the bottom over and over and over to people for Hotmail, or, I mean, the PayPal one's different because people just signed up. But yes, you will get lower conversion rate, and that the more you hit someone with the same message, the less they convert, is fundamental across every online marketing channel. Every online marketing channel. Cool. Second way to look at virality, which I think is awesome, is by this guy, Ed. And Ed runs the growth team at Uber now. He was at the growth team at Facebook, and he was a Stanford MBA student and did a class similar to this where they talked about virality, and they all went and built viral products, and there was a bunch of press about that, actually. And he's brilliant at this stuff. The interesting thing about Uber is if you look at their growth team, they're incredibly focused on drivers. Because as a two-sided marketplace, they need drivers. That's a huge, huge chunk of their focus as a team, even though they've got like probably the best viral guy in the world at the company. So with virality, you send out, you get someone to contact import, let's say. Then the question is, how many of those people do you get to send imports? Then the question is, to how many people? Then how many click? And you can put extra steps in this. You could put how many open, how many click, whatever. How many click, how many sign up, and then how many of those import. So essentially, you want people who sign up to your site to import their contacts. You want to then get them to send an invite to all of those contacts. You want to get it to all of those contacts, not just one of them. Then you want to get a percentage of those to click and a percentage of those to sign up. If you multiply out the percents at every point in this is essentially where, well, this isn't a percent, this is a number. If you multiply those out, that's essentially the point where you get to the question of what is the K factor. So if you have, when someone imports, if on average they send invites to 100 people, sorry, doing that wrong. Let's say 100 people get an invite per person who imports, and then of those 10% click, that gets you to 10. And then of those, let's say 50% sign up, that gets you to 5. And then of those, only 10 to 20% actually subsequently import. You're going to be at a point where you're at 0.5 to 1 as your K factor, and you're going to not be viral. So a lot of things like Vidi are very good at pumping, or were very good at pumping out stories that got the K factor over 1, and it's perfectly doable to get the K factor over 1. But if you have something that doesn't have high retention on the back end, it doesn't really matter. So you should look at your invite flow and say, okay, what is my equivalent of import? How many people per import are invites sent to? How many of those receive clicks? How many of those convert to my site? How many of those then import? To get an idea of your K factor. But the really important thing is still to think about retention and not to think about virality, and only do this after you have a large number of people retained on your product per person who signs up. So, a couple more things we were going to touch on. SEO, email, SMS, and push notifications. So on SEO, there are 3 things you need to think about. First one is keyword research. People do this badly all the time. So I launched this cocktail site that I talked to you about. I spent a year optimizing it to rank for the word cocktail making. Turns out in the UK, no one searches for cocktail making. About 500 people a month. I dominated that search term. It was awesome. Got 400 visitors a month. It was amazing. Everyone searches for cocktail recipes in the UK. And in the US, which is the biggest market, everyone searches for drink recipes. So I optimized for the wrong word. So you've got to do your research first about what you're going to go after. So research consists of, what do people search for that's related to your site? how many people search for it, how many other people are ranking for it, and how valuable is it for you. Supply, demand, and value. Simple economics, I guess. So you do your keyword research, you figure out which keywords you want to rank for. There are great tools out there to enable you to do that. Honestly, the best is quite often the Google AdWords keyword planner tool, really. Once you've done that, the next most important thing is links. So PageRank is how all of SEO essentially is driven, and Google is based on authority. Now, there's a lot of other things in Google's algorithm now, like do people search for your website? There's a lot of stuff about the distribution of what the anchor text is that's sent to your site so that if you abuse it and spam it, they can pop up with spam. White on a white background, 5 pages below the fold doesn't work anymore. But the single most important thing is to get valuable links from high authority websites for you to rank in Google. Most important thing. Then you need to distribute that love inside your site by internally linking effectively. And when I joined Facebook, we'd launched SEO in September 2007, which was before I joined. I joined November 2007. And we'd launched it and we were getting no traffic from the pages we'd launched, public user profiles. So when I went in and looked at it, the only way you could get to any public user profile was to click on the footer of the page for the about link, then click on one of the blog articles, then click on one of the authors, and then spider out through their friends to get to all their friends. Turns out that Google was like, they've buried these pages, they're not very valuable, I'm not going to rank them. We made one change. We added a directory so that Google could quickly get to every page on the site, and we 100x'd SEO traffic. Very, very simple change, drove a lot of upside about distributing the link love internally. And then the last thing is there's a bunch of table stake stuff, XML sitemaps, making sure you have the right headers. It's all covered really well online for what you want to do. I'm going to stop now and make sure, because we had a few questions, but what other questions are there? Go for it.
We're going to email, actually.
Let's go into email. Okay, great. Email. Email is dead for people under 25, in my opinion. Right? Young people don't use email. They use WhatsApp, they use SMS, they use Snapchat, they use Facebook. They don't use email. If you are targeting an older audience, email is pretty successful. Email still works for distribution, but realistically, email is not that great for teenagers especially, and even for people at university. You know how much you use instant messaging apps and how little you use email, and you guys are probably on the high end of the scale for email because you're in Silicon Valley. That being said, on email, the things to think about. Email, SMS, and push notifications all behave the same way. They all have questions of deliverability. So to finish first you have to finish. Your email has to get to someone's inbox. So if you send a lot of spam and you end up with dirty IPs, or you send spam from shared servers where other people are, or you send email notifications from shared servers where other people are sending spam from, you are going to end up being put in the spam folder consistently and your email will fail completely. You may end up being blocked and have your email bounce. So there's a lot of stuff around email where you have to look. When you receive feedback from the servers you are sending email to, 500 series errors versus 400 series errors, you have to be respectful of how those are handled. If someone gives you a hard bounce, retry once or twice and then stop trying. Because if you are someone who abuses people's inboxes, the email companies spam folder you and it's very hard to get out. If you get caught on a spam house link or anything like that, it's very hard to get out. It's really important with email that you are a high-class citizen, that you do good work with email because you want to have deliverability for the long run. That counts for push notifications and SMS too. With SMS, you can go and buy SMS traffic via gray routes with people where they're having phones strung up attached to like a computer and pumping out SMSs. That works for a time, but it always gets shut down. And I've seen so many companies make these mistakes where they think they're going to grow by using these kind of tactics. If you can't get your email, your SMS, or your push delivered, you will never get any success from these. Push, you spam your power users. I know that's slightly different to what I said earlier, but you actually spam your power users and give them notifications they don't care about and make it really hard for them to opt out. So there's no settings where they can opt out and they start blocking you. You can never push them once they've opted out of your push notifications. And it's very hard actually to prompt them to turn them on once they've turned them off. So number one thing to think about email, SMS, and push notifications is you have to get them delivered. Beyond that, it's a question of open rate, click-through rate. So what is the compelling subject line you can put there so that people are going to open your email? and how can you get them to click when they visit. Everyone focuses towards doing marketing emails that are just spam, in my opinion. Newsletters are stupid. Don't do newsletters because you'll send the same message to everyone on your site. Someone who signed up to your site yesterday versus someone who's been using your product for 3 years, do they need the same message? No. The most effective email you can do is notifications. So what are you sending? What should you be notifying people of? And this is a great place where we're in the wrong mindset. As a Facebook user, I don't want Facebook to email me about every like I receive, because I receive a lot of likes because I've got a bunch of Facebook friends. But as a new Facebook user, that first like you receive is a magic moment. Turning on that notification across all of our channels increased the click-through rate on our emails, SMS, and push notifications. But we only turned it on for low-engaged users who weren't coming back to the site, so it wouldn't be spamming them. So it was a great experience. So think about that. What notifications should you be sending is the first thing that you need to think about on email, SMS, and push. And then the second thing you need to be thinking about is how can you create great triggered marketing campaigns? So when someone created their first cross-border trade transaction, was one of the best email campaigns I was ever part of at eBay in terms of click-through rates. It was awesome because it was really timely, really in context, the right thing to do for the user. So I'd say make sure you have deliverability, most important thing. Focus on notifications and trigger-based email, SMS, and push notifications beyond that. So I think we're out of time. There's one thing I wanted to finish with, which is, and if you guys have any questions, I guess like you can reach me, and if I get spammed, I just won't reply. We have great spam filters. No. One of my favorite quotes is from General Patton, and it's so cliched, it's crazy, but it's awesome. A good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. And one of the things Chamath instilled in us, and Javi still instills in us, and Mark instills across the whole of Facebook, is this move fast and don't be afraid to break stuff ethos. If you can run more experiments than the next guy, if you can be hungry for growth, if you fight and die for every extra user and you stay up late at night to get those extra users, to run those experiments, to get the data and do it over and over and over again, you will grow faster. Mark has said he thinks we won because we wanted it more, and I really believe that. We just worked really hard. It's not like we're crazy smart or we've all done these crazy things before. We just worked really, really hard, and we executed fast. And I strongly encourage you to do that. Growth is optional. Thank you. Yeah.
That was really great. Thank you.